Welcome to the complete guide to Google Analytics 4. This video will summarize Chapter 7, which is about implementing the GA4 tracking code. And it was written by Search Discovery's own Jim Snyder. Now, Jim was the co-founder of Empirical Path, and he's spent over 12 years as a Google certified partner and a GA360 reseller. He has an MBA from Georgia Tech, and he's proudly from the DC area, McLean, Virginia. Jim, welcome.
Ken, thanks for having me. Yeah, glad to be here.
Thanks for joining, and I'm really excited to talk about your article. First things first, there's a lot of different ways to get data into Google Analytics 4. And in Chapter 7, you start off by explaining the 4 ways. So can you explain what those are and why someone might use each?
Yeah, so we've been at this for you mentioned 12 years. The first they really didn't have any choice going back to 10, 12 years ago. You really only had one way, which was to take the code and paste it that Google gave you, the JavaScript, and that was started with Urchin back going up to the most current Google tag, and really the sort of the easiest way to get code in there is really just to hard code it. It's really sort of a good option if you're, if you just want to sort of start to collect data, and it's really kind of a good MVP, sort of a minimally viable kind of solution. You might want to consider that if, let's say your CMS just offers it, or, it's not really a great option for, for e-commerce or for tracking more complex actions on the site. You do, of course, with GA4, get a lot of stuff out of the box, like scrolling and form completions, and a lot more stuff than you got back in the first iterations of GA when things were more manual. But that is still an option, so you can use the G tag hard code, and it's something that you just, if you just want to kick the tires and see. So really what most people do is they use Google Tag Manager, which is of course Google's own tag management system.
Yep.
It solves the pain point of having to sort of manually track everything. So it really gives you kind of that next tier of customization, the ability, the flexibility to not only track GA4, but also to track really any tag that's supported across Meta, Google, of course, anything in the Google marketing platform, Google Ads, and so forth. And you really just have the ability to set rules or so-called triggers to fire different tags. And really that's the most common way that most people use at the moment.
I remember in my early days writing jQuery, when somebody clicks this button, fire this JavaScript, and that all went away when tag managers became a thing.
Yeah, and it's really, with it's grown and capabilities now that you're able to do things like data governance, really get specific in terms of which tags can fire when. Of course, some of those features are in Tag Manager 360. But some of the key things that that you would want is a debugging feature, and the ability to sort of have kind of version control over and the ability to debug and make sure everything's tracking correctly, and make sure that there's no data leakage or anything along those lines. So that's really the most common method. The next sort of the next one obviously is if you have a mobile app. Everybody has a phone, everyone has one of these, and apps aren't tracked by default. So you have the ability now with the Firebase SDK to track Android and iOS apps. And really why you would want this is you just have no ability to really have visibility into how users are using the app, flowing through and converting, but also how do they then go from app to website and back, and where are they traversing across different touch points across the ecosystem that is either your app and website across to social and some of the other plays. And then obviously you have the ability to stitch users across with using Google's machine. GA4 has obviously leans a lot heavily on machine learning, and then so that's the third way. The fourth way is the measurement protocol. Think of this as if none of the above items work, you could use the measurement protocol to track things like a point of sale. Let's say you're if you really wanted to track, like, let's say an ATM machine, or if you're in a store that an internet connected device, sort of the Internet of Things, you would use measurement protocol, which would send a sort of a detailed set of tracking, which is kind of automatically collected in some of these other ways, but you have to sort of intentionally have name value pairs sort of in a string that you would send across to Google. And so that would be sort of the fourth way.
Right. So if you have a website, you have two options: JavaScript or Tag Manager. You have an app, you have the Firebase SDK. And if you're the KEG at the Search Discovery Office,
right,
then you use measurement protocol, because you have
Correct.
there's not a pre-built way to do that. Three of those four methods of tracking, so not measurement protocol, but Firebase, JavaScript, and Tag Manager, all share a new concept with GA4 that we didn't have with Universal Analytics, called the configuration tag. So love to just talk a little bit about what the configuration tag is and why it's important.
Yeah, it's a good question. So in GA Universal, you have basically the concept of a settings variable that basically takes that takes all of the key settings that were kind of were buried, frankly, in tags individually. So it was a pain in the butt to kind of to have to, in the past, to have to, if you wanted to update things like cross-domain tracking or fields to set a user ID, or different settings that are kind of across every tag that you have, like, not including obviously these are just for GA4, but it just basically has everything in one place. So it's just cleaner, it's easier to maintain, and it's just a heck of a lot easier to use. What's different, what may be a little bit different, is the fact that you also have user properties embedded in there. And so these are really what you would think of as a custom dimension, a user scoped custom dimension. And these are things that are assigned to the user. For example, if somebody's a platinum level of user on your website, you might want to know that they're a paid user, and they're at your upper tier, or they're just in a trial mode, or you may want to pass in different specific items that are user scoped, and talk more about this in the chapter. But that's all embedded in the config tag, and of course there's an event tag that goes along with that. And so all of the event tags sort of the config tag ties everything together in one place.
Okay, yeah. So the config tag sort of organizes everything, and then the events are telling you when things happen. When GA4 was first released, it was actually called the App Plus Web Beta, and a lot of the early discussion around GA4 and the benefit of it was that it is great for companies who have web and app experiences, especially when those experiences are the same. Like if I'm shopping Amazon Prime on my phone versus the web, the experience is basically the same, just in a different environment. So can you give a quick, just kind of like overview of what makes GA4 better at tracking cross environment than the old version?
And so I think the key with GA4 is that there's a common event model across Firebase that lives across web, mobile app, in what's called a stream, and you basically have everything in one place that's in a property in GA4, and so everything kind of lives happily together, and so you're able to kind of see these flows that kind of go back and forth.
Last question I've got for you is about server-side tag management. I've had a lot of clients ask me questions about the benefits of server-side, and often what I hear is a little confusion around, do I need to choose client-side or server-side? And so the sort of summary is, if you're using JavaScript, the global or the Google tag, tag manager, or Firebase SDK, you have an option to send data directly to Google servers, or you can still tag your website and your app the same way, but then send that data to your own server. It's just a middleman to intercept it before it's passed along to Google. Why would somebody choose to do this? What are the benefits of setting up a server-side tag manager to be a middleman between your website and Google?
Yeah, I mean it's really the more advanced setup. I mean it's kind of where I think more enterprises want to get to, because it's much more control over all the data that's being collected, and the ability to there's a couple different reasons. There's a lighter load on the browser, so it's a it's basically just faster, makes the web experience faster, and you really have a tighter control over, especially third-party tags, that you're really not sure what data is going over to, let's say, Facebook or to like a heat mapping tag or some other tag that might be on your site. You have the ability to really zoom in and specify which data is collected. And so as much tighter control, really, I mean, I think as far as GA, I think the key thing is, with intelligent tracking prevention, there's really a limit of the lifetime that the cookie is able to be served.
Right.
So the key thing is that, if you were serving ads in targeting and universal, if you're serving a tag through Tag Manager, I think, and this may be a little different depending, but in general, I'm understanding that it's roughly 7 days if you're serving it via JS, and then if you use the UTM parameters, it actually makes it 1 day. And so that the server side tag really it gives you the ability to kind of wind things back to 2 years, because you're not able to do that. And so I think the reason that you would want to go to server side is multiple, but for all those reasons, it's really
and specifically on that one, to recognize a returning user.
Right.
Yeah, if your cookie deletes after 7 days, you look like a new person.
Look like a new person, and then all your old data is not apples to apples. It doesn't really line up, and so if you really want to persist the tracking and compare year over year, going to a server side platform is really the way that you might want to consider going. Of course, it does incur cost, although it's pretty light in terms of cost, and it does require, obviously, more configuration and technical expertise. It's not a light undertaking at all, but it is something that if you really want to do it right and get it and sort of thread the needle in terms of doing things right, then you definitely want to consider the server side option.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, Jim, thank you very much. That's chapter 7, implementing GA4 tracking code. It's been great talking to you, and I appreciate the work you put into this.
Sure thing. Thanks, Ken.